Hi, I'm Brad Power, and I'm the host of the I was going to say Casey Altman, that's the other hackathon, the Linnea Olson Hackathon. This is number 14. I was looking back. We started this on April 9th. So it's been over 3 months that we've been having conversations about Linnea, her situation and her treatment options. And it's kind of reaching ahead. When we went into this, we didn't have a clearly defined what's done, what's the outcome we're striving for. But now we've got one, which is it's kind of crunch time. Linnea's in the hospital, as you may know. She's got pneumonia and fever. She's got, I guess, um, uh, pleural effusion, which I guess is liquid on the lung. And she's having trouble breathing and she's vomiting. So she's not going to be with us, I don't expect, today. And we assume that this will kick her off of the clinical trial that she's on, that it's not working, and that she'll need her next best treatment ASAP. And so on that basis, we are kind of on a emergency basis organizing the virtual review board that we had planned to do eventually, but now it's scheduled for this Sunday. And so I think that the best way to use our time today is do a dry run of that to basically work through the treatment options sort of past number one and maybe figure out what are the top two or three or combination. And I'll be turning it over to Kimmery to lead that conversation because she's been working with it the most. Before we do that, the other key news item is that we have the CARES report in. Linnea was able to request and share that. And so that's available in the Slack if you hadn't seen it. Those who are smarter than I am may have noticed something, but the single thing that I noticed and that Kimmery was working on was a new mutation that was identified, KEAP1. And so that might lead to some treatment pathways. I don't know. So that's the intro. Kimmery, would you be willing to take it away? And what I might do is maybe you can do a little verbal intro, but then what I might do is actually share the treatment options document. We can actually edit it as we go.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll just start by saying my concern is, Linnea's condition right now. And I think she was scheduled to have she had mentioned last time she was scheduled to have a scan yesterday. And it would be interesting to know, despite her side effects and the complications of pneumonia and other things, whether, how the tumor itself is doing. So we don't know that if she's progressing. It sounds like she's clinically progressing, symptomatically progressing, but we don't know radiographically whether the tumor has actually progressed or not. So that's really material information right now in thinking about any next step, as is her physical condition. So I feel like if her physical condition is like this, then she's likely not going to be eligible for a clinical trial. So that kind of takes a lot of that that's on the table, literally on our table of options, probably makes them not options anymore. And so it might narrow the list down to any suggested compassionate use programs and/or any off-label therapy of existing drugs. And that's kind of how I'm not a physician, but that's kind of how I'm categorizing things in my mind right now. That, the findings, in case anyone didn't, I did pontificate on Slack on the CARES report, and just to summarize for anyone who didn't see it, the CARES report does indicate that, immunotherapy is probably, from everything we know about immunotherapy biomarkers today, Linnea doesn't seem to have any. There's not biomarker expression that indicates that immunotherapy would benefit her. She's PDL1 0 by 3 different antibodies that were tested by IHC. She's microsatellite stable, which is an indicator of non-response to immunotherapy. And she has a very low tumor mutation burden at 5 mutations per megabase. So it's also not a good sign. It doesn't bode well for response to immunotherapy. Having said that, we all know that PDL1, TMB, and microsatellite stability or instability are not fantastically 100% great biomarkers, and that you can always, there's evidence that people who didn't have these biomarkers can still respond to immunotherapy. However, the clinical evidence of, that would persuade someone to want to give a patient with like negative on all immunotherapy biomarkers that are currently used in clinical practice, it's probably not, I don't know if anyone would suggest that, quite frankly. So that's the immunotherapy piece. I don't know how that extends to some of the therapies that were proposed around cell-based therapies, which are like TIL or CAR constructs or other TCR constructs. Again, those would be clinical trials, presumably, and whether she could qualify for a clinical trial right now, given her physical condition, is questionable. So the other finding that I noted was KEAP1 mutation. Just for purposes completely unrelated to Linnea, I actually was doing a lot of literature searching on that biomarker for another project. And the implications of that mutation are that, again, immunotherapy probably not a good option, and possibly even chemotherapy may not work with that mutation. That mutation is associated with a more aggressive type of cancer that uses, let's just call them escape mechanisms to survive in an environment of metabolic stress, for example. So I think that that's a very significant finding, actually. And I've got out on a limb and even said that it might even be more important to target this KEAP1 mutation than the ALK mutation itself. Again, that's a bold opinion, but I'm putting it out there. And I think the good news is that there is a company called Calathera that does have an open access program for an arginase inhibitor, which would be a good inhibitor for along the KEAP1 driven pathway. So that might be an option for Linnea. I think that pretty much summarizes what I gathered from the CARIS report relative to the treatment options that were in the table. I think the one I don't know much about is the Turning Point drug, and maybe someone could educate me on that, because it is one that Linnea mentioned that they're looking at. But from what I understand and can find online, they're not yet in humans with that drug. And Dr. Camage's email suggested that they don't even have a dose figured out yet. So I don't know if anyone has more to say about that.
Well, wasn't Turning Point one of the ones that would be available at MGH in the fall that Linnea was hoping to get to?
I don't know.
Okay, so Ricardo, maybe you know, because I think it was on Emily Venanzi also recommended it.
Yeah, I believe so. So we talked to them before, because they've been active in the ALK space before, and the hope of the next, like after lorlatinib, is actually that Turning Point TKI, and Camage reaffirmed that. But yeah, it would be a later this year type of concept that it will go to the clinic.
And yeah, and so
Do we have any data about downstream NRF2 activation from the KEAP1
Yeah.
mutation?
We don't. We also, the other thing I was going to point out is that the Karas report indicated that she's wild type for STK11. However, that doesn't mean the LKB1 protein is, being expressed. So we don't know if STK11 is being hypermethylated. Often KEAP1 co-presents along with STK11 mutation. So that's one I really wish we could do an IHC for LKB1 to know whether she also has that, because that would be even further indication of non-response to chemo and immunotherapy.
Kimmery, this raises something else that we were working on in the background, which is that this hackathon is really dependent on Linnea being healthy and active and able to advocate on her behalf, to request things like the test you just said, and sort of be in that sort of center quarterbacking point. And she's been incapacitated. And so you might update, but you attempted to get a HIPAA authorization. We attempted to contact Jess Lynn and integrate this hackathon more with her care team, which was something Jeff Waldron suggested last week. Can you sort of update on the state of what you did and what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, I felt it was kind of an emergency. I kind of dropped everything and I went online and, downloaded a HIPAA authorization form, filled it out with, the request to allow Brad on behalf of the hackathon to have access to medical records, radiology images, Karas reports, NGS reports, anything like that. And, filled it out so that all Linnea would have to do is either email it to someone or, and ask them to print it out and put it on file. I also sent the same form to Dr. Lynn with a CC with Linnea and Brad, and I did not hear back I did hear back from Linnea saying she just said thank you. So she saw it in her email, but I don't have the impression that anything was signed. And the note that I sent to Dr. Lynn, I said, we're looking to have a HIPAA authorization signed, something to the effect of the attached, but, obviously you probably have your own forms, and could you have someone on your team, present Linnea with something to sign? And, there was no response to that either. So, and I put in some phone calls and just got, leave a message, and no one called me back. So.
And I should say that Grace Cordovano was actively helping in this effort as well. And we've identified that we need care proxies set up in advance to cover for this eventuality. What I realized is that we've never faced it before in the previous hackathons that I've done. Bryce Olson was never that incapacitated. And in the case of Casey Altman, her mother's that caregiver, so she can step in when Casey's incapacitated. So it's a lesson learned for us for the future. Because even now we don't know a lot because we've been having text message conversations with Linnea, but she's not, doesn't have enough energy, I think, to really respond all the time to everything. So that was a great summary, Kimmery. Let me think about pausing here, unless anybody has anything that they want to, anything urgent and specific. And then all I'll do is I'll stop the recording and I will switch to going over see if we can update the treatment options document in the remainder of our time. Anybody with any comments before I stop recording?
Yes, I see in the document on her treatment options, the suggestions for adding treatment options off-label, consider off-label, including chemotherapy or cancer drugs, but also non-targeted therapies, metformin and others. And I think that's important to consider. And I think biologically, it's important to consider much earlier in the sequence of events of managing parallel tracks of treatment, looking for specific high affinity targeted agents, either approved or in clinical trials, which is what we've done a lot of, and also concurrently a parallel track with these non-targeted. Actually, I would also consider them as multi-targeted, because when you look at the data, they're low affinity binding, they're low affinity in affecting the molecular activities, and they're generally multi-targeted. And metformin's a good example of that. And there are other agents that can be brought to bear as you're constantly looking for these really high impact, great value targeted agents, either in clinical trials or in a succession of treatment. So that would be another lesson that I would bring forward for down, perhaps other cases. It may not be viable right now because of the limitations. If she's in the hospital, that's not going to happen in the hospital.
Got it. Jeff Waldron, you have your hand raised. Thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, as a follow-up to what you mentioned about communications, have you ever been able to connect with her care partner or the person who's sort of advocating for her at MGH?
It's a good question. We got the name. I sent her a text saying, should we involve that care partner? And I mentioned the name. And she said, yes, that would be a good idea. And then I said, I don't know who that person is or how to contact them. Can you give me the contact information for that person? And she didn't respond.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that's our best hope, and it may evolve that way, because she probably already has some of these healthcare authorizations that we're looking to secure. So it may be that, you can use her as a go-between, perhaps.
well, I agree. And what this has highlighted is you need backup. You need someone who can step in and fulfill a role when the patient is incapacitated.
Yes.
And so I will, with your prompt, Jeff, I will text Linnea. I don't want to bother Linnea. I picture her being in her hospital bed and, not with a lot of energy.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think this one is important enough. We'll ask her again.
It's sort of a way of not bothering her by allowing us to then in the future contact someone else instead of her.
And that's the other thing. Kim Marie did this and Grace did this all in the spirit of let's offload stuff from you because we know you're not feeling well. So with all in that spirit.
I can't imagine two better people than those two to do it. But if we could get a hold of this person, they may be doing things we're not aware of too, so I just feel still it's a collaboration opportunity.
Agreed, we'll do. Anything else before I stop recording?
Just one thing. I want to support what Dr. Will LaValle mentioned on the non reformatted off-label drugs available out there. I'm not an expert if they work, if they work at this stage of it, but in parallel, there's been some good literature out there that could be helpful and complementary. I think ideally integrative earlier than at this point in time, but it's stuff that I feel folks don't proactively go out there and do. I think typical medical oncologists don't really support it, but I think if it doesn't get in the way and it can be complementary, it can be an important other hope, and it attacks multiple networks of so it's not just one hallmark of cancer, but many.
I agree, and it's also in Linnea's spirit. There are different patients have different orientations towards these alternative therapies like metformin, but Linnea has expressed specifically sort of like traditional Western medicine isn't working, so I'll try anything. So she's very much open-minded in that area.
Brad and everyone, I just want to follow that as well, that if, at some point, some kind of nutraceutical agents are of consideration, then even though I wouldn't hang my head on it for the actual, the most effective treatment, I can suggest some things that would be beneficial, at least, biologically speaking, should be beneficial in terms of addressing the pathways around, KEAP1 and NRF2, or at least they wouldn't be harmful because we know of the, like reactive oxygen species and different sort of oxidative damage type of events that can be protected from just simple nutraceuticals that exist right now, including actually besides some of the well-known ones, some that act like metformin. Now, when I'm speaking about this, I just want to be very clear. I'm not representing Cure Match, because this isn't like me shifting to my nutraceutical hat, which is from a different lifetime. If she's open to it, if you think that it would be useful, I can propose a couple of supplement types that can with some rationale for consideration.
I think that's exactly where we are, Ali, and I think the answer is yes. Please do.
I just don't want it to sound like, okay, this is the therapeutic, like the therapeutic strategy. If anything, it's more like adjuvant kind of thing.
Well,
I wouldn't put as much.
I'm sensing parallels with two things. Yesterday, so first of all, Casey Altman needed some bridging. She was finishing her round of chemo, and it was going to be 3 months before she got on her next round of treatment. And the fear was that her aggressive cancer would recur. And so they gave her an extra round of chemo. So there was this need for a bridging strategy. And I think we're in the same way. If there's an opportunity, let's say either with Turning Point or with one of these other therapies in the fall, we need to get Linnea to the fall. And so there's that aspect. The other thing is that yesterday we heard a presentation from Damon Reed at Moffitt Cancer Center. And what he was talking about was evolutionary biology and the approach that they take, which is not to think of it as a one strike and you have a knockout punch, but rather to think that you have strike one, strike two, strike three. And you think in terms of that, you see, like, you run these things and then you switch because the cancer mutates. So in that philosophy as well, having the kinds of shots on goal you mentioned, or strikes, is also a reasonable approach.
Yeah, and also I don't know if we're still planning on having more therapeutic strategies discussion, but I'm trying to put something together in case several on-label, in a way, for cancer indications, on-label targeted therapies could be considered in some sort of synergistic combos. There could be various 2-drug or even potentially 3-drug therapy options that could be at least important enough to consider. I think more likely 2-drug options would be more relevant here, but I'm trying to put something together, and I know that there's something already in the CARES report, but I'm not sure it covers everything comprehensively. So I don't know when would be the best time to submit sort of additional suggestions.
So 3 opportunities. There's now, so I'll stop the recording and we can discuss it to the extent you're ready now. Okay. Second, there's the Slack, and so you can have a conversation there 24/7. And then third, we've got our review board meeting on Sunday at 4 Pacific or 7 Eastern. So that would be the forum to have that conversation.
There's also the document too, Brad.
Right. That's right. You
can
comment.
I agree. We should probably add a, non-therapeutic, but like a supportive or supplementary or nutraceutical, section to that as well.
What suits you, Ally, time-wise, relative to your thoughts on this?
Well, I can share some thoughts even right now, but I think I would like to have our kind of cure match report ready. So I don't have it right now, but I can have it ready by Sunday, if I may present it. It's more about, some of the drugs have been mentioned before, like the same, crizotinib and a few others, but I still think that there should be some consideration of other mutations that could, if they are there, what would be the best way, let's say to have a catch-all strategy for P53, which can be also indirectly addressed by some of the TKIs or even bevacizumab, but that could also play into the perhaps some other pathways that are engaged here. So if we were to consider that as comprehensively from everything we know for this case, maybe a few other therapy options could be relevant. And also, if we're still going to go back to considering potentially DNMT3A being involved, and perhaps it can be kind of like a second tier of things to consider, as opposed to just the most recent report. So I was hoping to kind of provide in a way, a ranking of what would be the different options to combine these therapies, and which would be the top scoring options for Linnea.
Thank you. So Sunday sounds like the best time to do that. And if you have interim results, please share them on the Slack as you're pulling that together. And just to foreshadow that, the other piece of information is that behind the scenes in this kind of fire drill of launching the review board, I sent messages to 25 people that have been identified, largely by Ricardo and by Emily Venanzi and Kimmery and others. And we got a few responses. I think I posted most of those in the Slack, but nobody of that group has volunteered to be available on Sunday. And so just to kind of set expectations, I think the conversation on Sunday could largely be between Ally and Kimmery. So, but with Ricardo and others on the sidelines, maybe commenting on and putting their finger on the scale occasionally. But your ability to go deep in the technical domain exceeds anyone else that I think will be there. So you can think of this as an opportunity for Ally, for you to present, and Kimmery, for you to present, and for us to just have a conversation on Sunday. And that was what my hope for today was, that we would just sort of set the stage for Sunday. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just keep thinking about, the reality of our situation, and we can propose all kinds of mechanistically, biologically plausible combinations, but her ability to tolerate them, bevacizumab sounds great, but I don't know, if she could even tolerate it right now.
Yeah,
that's a question in my mind, and that's why I keep kind of going for these things, I'm a big fan of the metformin, hydroxychloroquine kind of stuff, but I know that her doctors are not going to go for that. They're just not going to go for that. So
I have a nutraceutical alternative for metformin, which is possibly weaker, but has the same type of targeting. But okay, besides that, I think that bevacizumab, the reason I mentioned it is because, well, first of all, it's a monoclonal antibody. So even though I also mentioned TKIs, it could be for the reason that you mentioned, if we have any rationale for a monoclonal antibody, with all things equal, of course, that could be more easily tolerated than a multi-kinase inhibitor, and small molecules probably in general.
yeah, I think it's a matter of she's being treated at a very conservative institution. I'm going into this thinking that anything we propose that is not either listed in NCCN guidelines or has at least one prospective clinical trial published in some reputable journal, they're just not going to do it.
You're
They're-
right. You're
they're all-
absolutely right. It won't happen. Not in the hospital. And even if it could, or say she was out, you still have PO, oral administration for most of these items. And that's an issue of tolerance and dosing, scheduling. And it's really a challenge for where she is clinically. I agree. And I think it's, and Ali, I think you're probably talking about berberine in a combination instead of metformin, but maybe you had another item in mind. And to get therapeutic dosing is really challenging with these natural products or concurrent with the non-cancer treatment, so the primary care pharmaceuticals. And so it's probably not even on the board as being an option where she is right now.
Also, there's the issue of insurance payment for these therapies, which is not something we should overlook, because
That's
if
right.
her physicians are not on board to get the authorization from her insurance company to give these off-label therapies,
That's right.
That's a double fight then.
That's right. And that's why I raised that this discussion in earnest, rather than being only considered at the last moment, should be much more rationally considered far earlier as a branch of therapy, as a parallel therapy, not instead of, but in addition to, and in parallel with, to control the molecular network signaling concurrent to high affinity precision oncology targeting that could be very valuable.
Yeah.
mean,
Well, just to answer your comment, I was thinking about berberine, but in a good combination with some flavonoids that can also
Sure.
serve,
sure.
the radical protective effects downstream of KEAP and NRF2. But it's all about, the right combination and the right sources. And, if we could find one, there's a couple of options, obviously,
Well,
but pick one. It's just an Amazon whatever order. Could be I could order it for her. We don't need doctor's approval for that. So that's like a separate, in a way, it's a separate discussion. We don't need anyone to bless it if we decide that, this is at least not going to be of any harm. If anything, it will be of support to her body and, just cellular health at the very least. At most, it might actually, help other things take effect and, synergistically work together to target the cancer, but I just wanted to put it aside.
Absolutely.
We didn't want to get
No,
into
I
it.
understand. I understand. And the point with the NRF2, I was asking about NRF2 and downstream from KEAP1, whether we had any data, was whether or not KEAP1 was upregulated, overactive with increasing signaling. I've seen a number of tumor types where patients had too much NRF2, and then some of the natural products, the polyphenols, would essentially augment that rather than antagonize the cancer. So it becomes tricky. We need to know what we're aiming at.
Yeah, the specific
Right.
mutation is in the report, Will, and that's a really good point. There are sort of pleomorphic effects sometimes of these things. And
Right.
just getting back to pragmatics here, I think that honestly, for me, the list that I see that we've compiled so far, the only thing that I think personally is this, what do you call it? Expanded access program with Calathera. I think that's something we could get her doctors to sign up for while they're waiting for the ALK turning point thing. And let's be very honest, guys. That's a long time for Linnea. That is a lifetime. The fall is a lifetime for Linnea right now. So I think that, she's got to keep one mutation. This is the only thing out there for it. They also have a very interesting arginase inhibitor in development, but from what I can tell, I don't think that's in humans yet, and they probably don't have the dosing figured out for that yet either. But the fact that they have an open access program, I think it bodes well. And personally, I'd do that plus metformin.
Brad, I was going to interrupt for 1 minute. I think it was on this call a week or two ago. I met that fellow Jian Li, who's the CEO and founder of Filtracine. So I don't
Yes.
know, this is more of a long-term thing like you're talking about too, but his dietary restriction model in his work at Stanford has shown beneficial reinforcement of therapeutic options and independent of therapeutic options, improvement in delaying the growth of the cancer. They basically, I'm not a clinician, but they rob the cancer of an important amino acid. So I'm not sure that's, once again, longer term. I agree with everything Kimmery said about this, near term versus sort of longer term, and the longer term being, hopeful but challenging. So we may want to just have someone understand more what Jian's doing. I've connected him with a couple of cancer patient foundations already, including Rick Davis at ANCAN, because his first clinical trial is in prostate cancer right now. Jian's is. But given that she's also having trouble, with food intake and that kind of thing, it could possibly, it'd be difficult to get, Mass General to sign on to it. I agree with that aspect too. But if she's, able to go home eventually here, it may be supplemental and it isn't necessarily harmful, in addition to metformin and some of these other therapeutic options.
I'm going to stop recording. I should have done it sooner. Kimmery just reminded me.